All right, so today we're going deep on China.
Yeah.
And it really is a deep dive because we're going all the way back to the very beginning.
It's a long history.
It is a very long history.
Thousands of years.
We're talking thousands of years, and we're going to try to pull out just those sort of essential threads that help us understand this country, which is, a major player on the world stage.
Absolutely.
Today.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of different sources for this one.
We do.
And we're going to be looking at everything from history and governance and the economy and the culture to just try and get a sense of how China got to where it is today.
Well, and I think that's what makes this one so fascinating because, even for someone like me who, studies this stuff, China's scale is still kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, 1 out of every 6 people in the world lives in China.
Wow.
Like, that's a huge chunk of humanity. And then, you've got these incredible feats of engineering, like their high-speed rail network, which is so extensive it could circle the globe 4 times.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's just one example, but it gives you an idea of just how much there is to unpack here.
Yeah, so I guess, where do we even begin with a story this big?
Well, I think the logical place to start is at the beginning.
Okay.
Way back with the early dynasties.
Okay.
So we're talking the Xia dynasty, the Shang dynasty, and the Zhou dynasty.
And these really laid the foundation for what we think of as Chinese civilization.
Exactly. They set the stage. I mean, think about the Shang dynasty, for example, with their mastery of bronze casting.
Right.
I mean, these incredibly intricate and beautiful objects.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Zhou dynasty who developed a hierarchical political system.
Right.
Which, had a lasting impact on how China was governed for centuries.
So really setting those core structures in place early on. Okay, so then moving on from those early dynasties, I guess we get to what we would consider the start of Imperial China.
Right around 221 BCE.
Okay.
With the rise of the Qin dynasty.
And this is really a major turning point.
Oh, absolutely.
It is.
I mean, this is when China was unified for the first time under Qin Shi Huang.
Right.
And this guy, he was a real force of nature.
Yeah.
I mean, he standardized writing systems, weights and measures.
Wow.
He started work on the Great Wall.
Huge undertaking.
Massive. And of course, you can't talk about the Qin dynasty without mentioning the Terracotta Army.
Right.
This incredible collection of life-size terracotta soldiers and horses.
They're buried with Qin Shi Huang, right?
Exactly. Around 210 BCE. It's like the snapshot of the military might of the era.
It's incredible.
I mean, can you imagine stumbling upon that?
Yeah, it must have been an amazing discovery.
Oh, absolutely. A defining moment in archaeology.
So after this period of unification under the Qin dynasty, we move into another really significant period, right?
Yeah. The Han Dynasty, which lasted from 207 BCE to 220 CE.
Okay.
And this is often seen as kind of a golden age for China.
Right.
A time of peace and prosperity.
And what were some of the key developments during this time?
Well, one of the big ones was the establishment of the civil service system.
Right.
Which was based on merit rather than, just family connections or wealth.
So that's a pretty progressive idea for that time.
Yeah, definitely ahead of the curve. And then, of course, you have Kai Lun's invention of paper in 105 CE.
Right, which revolutionized communication.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, imagine a world without paper.
It's impossible.
And then there was the Silk Road, which really flourished during this period.
Yeah, and that facilitated all kinds of trade and cultural exchange between China and the West.
Exactly. So you have all these different ideas and goods flowing back and forth. It was a really dynamic time.
Okay, so following the Han Dynasty, things get a little bit more fragmented, right?
Yeah, there's a period of instability known as the Six Dynasties.
Oh.
And this was a time of, political upheaval and warfare.
Right.
But it's also when Buddhism really started to spread throughout China.
Okay, so how did that happen?
Well, Buddhist monks traveled along the Silk Road, bringing their teachings with them.
Right.
And they established monasteries, which became centers of learning and art.
So kind of spreading the Buddhist philosophy and culture throughout the country.
Exactly. And then after the Six Dynasties, you have the Sui dynasty,
Right.
which managed to reunify China, albeit for a relatively short time.
Right.
But one of their most lasting achievements was the completion of the Grand Canal.
Which was huge for trade and transport.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this canal connected the north and south of China, making it much easier to move goods and people around.
So kind of like a major infrastructure project.
Exactly. A real feat of engineering.
So then after the Sui dynasty, we get to another one of those golden ages, right?
Yeah. The Tang dynasty, which lasted from 618 to 907 CE.
Okay.
And this was another period of flourishing arts, poetry, and culture.
Really a high point for Chinese civilization.
Definitely. I mean, this is when you have some of the most famous Chinese poets like Li Bai and Du Fu.
Right.
And the Tang Dynasty also saw the first use of woodblock printing,
Okay.
which was a major step forward in terms of spreading knowledge.
Yeah, because before that, everything had to be copied by hand.
Right, which was a very slow and laborious process.
So woodblock printing allowed for the mass production of books and other written materials.
Exactly. And it also made it possible to create more elaborate illustrations.
Right, so really kind of opening up new possibilities in the world of printing and publishing.
Definitely. And of course, the Silk Road continued to be a major artery for trade and cultural exchange during the Tang Dynasty.
Okay, so it was a time of great prosperity and cultural flourishing.
Absolutely.
So following the Tang Dynasty, we see another period of disunity, right?
Yeah, the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period.
Which was a time of chaos and conflict.
Right, but it eventually gave way to the Song Dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279 CE. And this was another period of great innovation.
Yeah.
I mean, for one thing, you have Bi Sheng's invention of movable type printing.
Wow, so that's even more advanced than woodblock printing.
Oh, yeah, much more flexible because you could rearrange the individual characters to create new pages of text.
Right, so that really revolutionized printing again.
Absolutely. And it paved the way for the mass production of books.
Right, so that made knowledge more accessible to more people.
Exactly. And in addition to movable type, the Song Dynasty also saw the invention of gunpowder and the compass.
Huge technological advancements.
Oh, yeah, massive. And they had a profound impact on the course of history.
Absolutely. So the Song Dynasty was a really significant period in terms of technological progress.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then after the Song Dynasty, things take another turn, right?
Yeah, in 1279 CE, the Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, conquered China.
Okay.
And they established the Yuan dynasty.
So this is the first time that China was ruled by a foreign power.
Exactly.
And what was that like?
Well, it was a pretty tumultuous period. There was a lot of resistance to Mongol rule.
Right.
But at the same time, the Yuan dynasty also facilitated a lot of communication between East and West.
Right.
Most famously through travelers like Marco Polo.
Yeah, who spent 17 years in Kublai Khan's court.
Right, and his accounts of his travels really opened up people's eyes to the wonders of China.
So even though it was a period of foreign rule, it also had some positive aspects.
Exactly. It was a very complex time.
Okay, so then after the Yuan dynasty, we get to the Ming dynasty.
Right, which came to power in 1368 CE after overthrowing the Mongols.
Okay.
And they were all about restoring Chinese rule and traditions. I mean, one of their first big projects was the construction of the Forbidden City.
Which is still standing today.
Oh, yeah, a masterpiece of architecture and a symbol of imperial power.
And the Ming dynasty also launched some pretty impressive naval expeditions, right?
Yeah, led by the famous Admiral Zheng.
Right.
He sailed all over the Indian Ocean, visiting Southeast Asia, India, even the east coast of Africa.
Wow, so they were really projecting their power on the world stage.
Oh, absolutely. They had this massive fleet of ships, and they brought back all sorts of exotic goods and treasures.
So the Ming dynasty was a pretty powerful and prosperous time for China.
Yeah, they really left their mark on history.
Okay, so then we get to the final imperial dynasty, the Qing dynasty.
Right, which lasted from 1644 to 1912.
And this was another period of significant change for China.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for one thing, you have the Opium Wars in the 19th century.
Right, which were fought between China and Great Britain.
Right, over Britain's attempts to force China to trade opium.
Which was a very destructive drug.
Yeah, it had a devastating impact on Chinese society.
Right, and the Opium Wars really weakened the Qing dynasty and opened up China to more foreign influence.
Exactly, and then on top of that, you have a series of internal rebellions.
Right, like the Taiping Rebellion.
Yeah, which was a massive peasant uprising that lasted for over a decade.
It was incredibly bloody.
It was really a time of turmoil.
And all of this ultimately led to the downfall of the Qing dynasty.
Right. In 1911, the Xinhai Revolution broke out.
And that marked the end of imperial rule in China.
Exactly. And it ushered in a new era.
Okay. So I guess that brings us to modern China.
Right. And it all starts with the establishment of the Republic of China in 1912.
Okay.
But this was a very fragile republic.
Yeah.
There was a lot of infighting between different factions.
Right.
And the country was plagued by warlordism.
So it was a really chaotic time.
It was.
And then, of course, you have the founding of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921.
Right, which would eventually go on to play a major role in shaping China's future.
And then there was the second Sino-Japanese War, which broke out in 1937.
Right, and this was a brutal conflict that lasted for 8 years.
And it really devastated China.
It did.
And then after the war ended in 1945, China was plunged into a civil war.
Right, between the communists and the nationalists.
And the communists emerged victorious in 1949.
And that's when the People's Republic of China was founded.
With Mao Zedong as its first chairman.
Right.
And so begins the communist era of China.
Exactly.
And this was a time of radical change for China.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Mao implemented a series of sweeping reforms.
Like a great leap forward.
Which was an attempt to rapidly industrialize the country.
Right.
But it ended up being a disaster.
Yeah, it led to widespread famine.
It did.
And then there was the Cultural Revolution.
Which was a period of intense political and social upheaval.
Right.
It was a really dark time for China.
Yeah. But then after Mao's death in 1976, things started to change again.
Right. Deng Xiaoping came to power.
And he launched a series of economic reforms.
Which opened up China to the world.
Right. And that led to the incredible economic growth that we've seen in recent decades.
Exactly. China has become a global economic powerhouse.
And that brings us pretty much to the present day.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. So just to kind of sum up, I think it's clear that China has this incredibly long and complex history.
Absolutely.
And it's gone through all these different cycles of unity and disunity and periods of incredible innovation and periods of inward focus.
Right.
And all of these experiences have shaped the country that we see today.
Definitely.
So when we think about China's current standing in the world, I think it's important to remember all of this history.
I agree.
It provides a lot of context for understanding how China got to where it is today.
Absolutely. And I think it also raises some interesting questions about where China might be headed in the future.
Right.
I mean, if we look at China's historical patterns of unity and fragmentation and its fluctuating engagement with the global stage, I think those patterns might provide some insights into how China will navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
That's a really interesting thought.
And I think it's something for all of us to consider as we try to make sense of this increasingly complex world.
Absolutely. So I guess that's something for our listeners to ponder.
Yeah. What other seemingly paradoxical aspects of China might hold further keys to understanding its future role in the world?
Right. There's a lot to think about.
There is.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned a lot, and hopefully our listeners have too.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
And until next time, keep diving.
Keep exploring.
Yeah.
See you later. Bye.